So what did you miss at Jubilee today? Well, you missed the official church announcement that Eleanor Miriam Jane Denisio was born last Wednesday, March 1st, 7:23 in the morning. She weighs 7.2 pounds, and Mom Ann and Dad Max and baby Eleanor are home and healthy and happy, and we couldn't be more ecstatic. So you also missed the first Sunday of Anne's maternity leave, which meant you missed me running around trying to figure out what the heck to do without my partner. But we seem to manage. We seem to get through it. We listened today to Genesis and the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and how they had to leave the garden when they realized that they were naked. They were human. And we wondered together whether it was an expulsion as much as it might be a graduation from the garden. More on that. And then we read the gospel, Matthew's gospel, and heard of Jesus being in the desert and being tempted by the devil. We heard the choir sing God Be in My Head, a beautiful setting by Rudder. And then I wondered with all of us how we might connect all of these things, all of the God things going on in my head, and trying to make sense of the Garden of Eden, Jesus' temptation, and of course, this was the beginning of Lent, and so we were celebrating communion. And so on our communion table were the classic elements as you would expect them to be, the juice, the bread, but also stones and apples. And so we talked about the Genesis story of Adam and Eve and wondered if it might be read or understood as a graduation more than an expulsion. I mean, if it's a punishment, it seems peculiar that God doesn't stay back in the garden and abandon Adam and Eve. But God also leaves the garden to be with Adam and Eve as they struggle with their mortality. Mortality that means that they will die. Mortality that means that they will struggle and they will hurt, but they will love and they will rejoice as well. Having left the garden, they leave now with the knowledge of good and evil. They become moral agents. They get to decide for themselves. And so there's no place in the garden for them anymore. They are now partners with God. And into that partnership, God does come with them. And so begins a dance, I suppose. Adam and Eve now dance with God, coming closer, going further away, closer, further away. And we hear that story throughout Scripture as the story of humanity, drawing closer to God, then coming away. We wondered if perhaps that might not be what sin is, the pulling away, and then there's the coming closer. And that brought us to the story of Jesus being tempted. And we recognized the temptation seemed silly to us, to be thrown off a temple tower, to rule, or to turn stones into bread. And as we talked about it, as we wondered about it, it started to emerge that perhaps these temptations were all really about isolation, about breaking down the network of humanity, of creation. To rule over it all myself means that I don't need anybody else. I'll make all the decisions. They might be the right decisions, but in making those decisions, I am isolated. I am cut off. And other people become isolated because they don't have to contribute. And maybe Jesus recognized that. And so said no and drew closer to God. Or showed us how to draw closer to God. To be thrown off the high tower, assured that angels would catch him, but still, isn't that leaving it all up to God? That's withdrawing from the partnership. It's isolation again. I don't have to do anything. God will catch me. And Jesus again resists that temptation and shows us the value in resistance. and then to turn stones into bread. Such a small thing. Who would know? Nobody was there. Jesus could have simply done it, fed himself, and didn't have to take anything from anybody else. It seems to be a victimless transgression. But Jesus says no, and assures us that even the smallest thing we do in the opposition to evil and injustice is worth doing. And Jesus not only refuses to turn stones into bread, but ultimately becomes bread himself as we come to the communion table and recognize the words of Jesus, "This is my body broken for you. Take, eat." Jesus resists the temptation of isolation, of doing it by yourself, of letting God do it all, of keeping secrets, and instead becomes a symbol of absolute community, where all of creation is called to the table, where everybody comes together and is reminded or becomes aware that we are all together children of God. We are a vast network. And when we love, it affects us all. And when we withdraw, it affects us all. So we went from the Garden of Eden to the table and then into the world. Into the world to not isolate ourselves, but to connect, to recognize that it matters when we do things, to recognize that we are all together brothers and sisters, children of God, and part of creation. So that's what you missed at Jubilee today. But hopefully you're aware that you're not alone. You're aware that you matter to us. And hopefully we'll get to see you soon. Until we do, God bless.